we are essentially picking up some generic time in the future here. Um, I think if we kind of stick to the general idea that we're kind of going for, this is essentially real time, um, that it's safe to say that we're looking at something like 1 to 2 weeks with Davros not actually seeing or hearing anything from Dem, but I think we're actually closer to like 3 weeks or 4 weeks from when we originally played, because it was originally that Halloween one shot that was like right before Halloween, I think was the reason I did the haunted house. So I think we're pretty close to this, might be a month. And that's kind of up to you how much you want to fudge that time frame. Have you thought about how long Davros goes or would go without word from his son before he actually does get concerned? And once he's concerned, before he gets up in arms about it?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like you know, Dem is constantly kind of coming and going, so it wouldn't like he would be immediately concerned. I mean, he did send him to investigate something, and but he might just he would just have assumed that okay, when he didn't hear anything, it just meant everything was fine. Um, so I think it would maybe be. Hmm, Maybe like if he doesn't hear back after like 3 weeks or so, I would think he would be um that might be when he would start to um maybe just like kind of do some not like deep investigating, but like maybe asking around, checking out, maybe like going to some of the taverns, seeing, has anyone seen them? Even though it's not really his like scene. Um and then if we want to kind of keep it sort of real time, then at this point it's been about a month, and now he's like, okay, I need to, and maybe at the urging of his wife, he's okay. He's going to um, just set out and kind of uh, more urgently start his search for Dem. And part of it, I guess, also part of the delay also would be that like they he works for a living, so it's not he can't really um, maybe he needed to you know save up money, or it took him some time to find the money to buy um, get essentially prepare himself to go out looking, something like that.
So how about let's start with um, if you were to go check out some of the local taverns in the Guildsman district. I think a large amount of where we situated them was in kind of this southeast section between Vadras Street on the west, Smoke Street on the south, and like Curtain and Ring Road. I think that's where we put a lot of the different locations that Dem. Oh, what I'm drawing in clear, maybe? Oh, I'm drawing in an eraser. That's why I can't draw.
Yeah, I think this kind of area.
So I think a large amount of what where we put them had actually been kind of focused in there. Like I've got this is Myrna's Keep, the little penny lane, or the penny sleeper that they would stay at kind of regularly. And then I think I had where was the tavern? This was one of their kind of like mainstay taverns. right off of Draper's there. So if that's where they spent most of their time, I think we kind of discussed it almost as if your parents stayed maybe somewhere a little bit more south towards like Wayfarer Street and near like the actual um, it's that trash heap. It's like that's why Seepage Row is what it is. I feel like we kind of put them a little bit closer to that. Um, Not necessarily because it's a nicer place, but because it's so close to that, it would actually be a cheaper place. Um, but how likely do you think they would know his proper places that he would go versus are you just starting to go to different taverns in the Guildsman district? Do you think he has those options? Otherwise, let me just have a this is where I want to go back to Call of Cthulhu and just like a luck roll would be so perfect. But I feel like maybe um, I don't know, just like an intelligence.
Yeah, I don't think he would. I don't think he would know. Or maybe even if them told him, like he just like he it's not information he would have paid any attention to. So he'd be this would be pretty much just kind of he knows Dem likes going to taverns and stuff, but he doesn't know um, like his main haunts, or so he's kind of searching a little blindly here. So that should be a 13.
All right, I think that's pretty good to where maybe you're going around to a few of these taverns and just kind of like blindly asking bartenders about your son and maybe like describing him. Um, not necessarily going during business hours so much as going like while they're doing like side work and kind of preparing like between big rushes. Um, and you get little bits of information, but more things along the lines of like people kind of recognizing your son. Uh, Maybe things along the lines of it's been quite some time since he's been in, but nobody really has any like actual like solid dates or time frames. But basically you might go to like 3 or 4 taverns just kind of generically north of your home and kind of hear these same things. Um, but nowhere that seems to recognize him by name, nowhere that seems to have seen him in the recent past. But it kind of like maybe you go to a tavern over near like Cobbler's Road and Bond Street. I actually think we put one of the like open-ended bars in near Brewers Close in that area. Maybe they did something like that and like somebody remembered when he went there with Briff, almost 2 months ago now. And you've got like somebody down my bad, let me actually show you that.
Yeah, I think the place on Brewers Close was where we first kind of went after he got Briff. We went there and yeah, talked about the map. I remember that.
And then maybe like you kind of like go by one off near the coast, and there's a tavern kind of over here. Speaking with them, kind of the same idea. You're not getting any great information. They are people who recognize him. They've seen him recently, but to them, recently is like this season kind of thing. Nobody who's really knowing him by name. And then another one maybe up near Hammers Close, where you find a little shop over here. And pretty similar kind of feeling, like nothing that really isolates it, nothing that like throws you off that you're finding out anything like bad or anything. But it's enough that like it satisfies that kind of like initial urge to search for him, and it basically neither placates nor like satisfies the answers that you're looking for.
Right. Gotcha. Yeah, I'm thinking his, and then after maybe another week or so, and maybe, his wife is like, you need to go find him. Um, Having kind of asked around at some of these places, probably logically the next place he would think to go would be um, kind of following after where he had sent the direction he had sent Dem off to, in terms of checking on Uncle Neener, I think it was.
Gotcha. So checking on the uncle. I think this is where the map starts to get kind of confusing on how I set it up because it's right off near one of the cutoff sections. I think we kind of said maybe the uncle's house, right about that one.
Yeah, I think it was near like kind of where the Warrens and the Guildsman district kind of like in that area. I think maybe it's still technically within Guildsman, but very close to the Warrens.
Yeah, the old sea road there is the break between them. And that's basically where like the Warrens is the east side of the road and the Guildsman district is the west side of the road. Like that little red circle that I have is the kind of haunted house, like right in between on like the southern side. So I think that's about where we put them. We may have done it a little bit more northern, but again, it was just kind of randomly chosen that day, anyways. Um, so let me have you roll a D100 for me.
93.
So when you go to check on Ninor, um, the first arrival at the house is going to actually be. Give me one more moment, my bad.
Nope, no worries.
So as you arrive to the house, there's actually a large gathering that seems to actually kind of formed, like at this location, and like you're going to struggle to continue to get closer to the house. There's kind of like a throng of people that seems to almost be like this mass, like shoulder to shoulder, for about like 200 or 300 feet south, as well as like to the north of the house on Old Sea Road. When you get to this area and start to just kind of hit this like brick wall of people, though, you can hear vaguely somebody is kind of like yelling to this crowd, but you can't quite make it out yet. What's your initial thought when you're like, okay, I'm close. I could either divert to try to get around this, or I could figure out what's going on here. Where's your initial kind of thought there?
Yeah, so I think Davros is, I mean, he's a big guy. So he's going to essentially try to start pushing his way through to get closer to the speaker while also just kind of like shouting out, like, what's going on? Essentially trying to grab a couple of people at random and like, what's going on? What's going on? Just very gruff and not at all concerned with kind of just shoving people out of the way.
All right, let me have a choice from you here. You can do a perception to try to listen into the speaker first, or you can do an intimidation as you grab somebody up and question them.
I think intimidation would be the way he would go initially.
Gotcha.
Uh,
You're further away from the speaker at present, so that makes sense that, you're kind of like trying to listen. It's still a little bit strained. You can't quite pick up what they're doing. So yeah, you just kind of grab somebody up by the scruff, start to ask them like what's going on.
yeah, and that will be flat.
Oh, your intimidation's flat. I was like,
Yeah,
oh, surely that's a 16 or something. All right, word.
Yeah, because it's a charisma. So, like in some cases, it might make sense to use
Oh,
like if
I
I.
always feel like my apologies. I always feel like, especially with barbarians, I should have said this as well. Let me get an intimidation, but with your strength, like athletics. If you have not athletics, rather, let me get an intimidation with your strength. So if you have intimidation proficiency, which you don't, but otherwise with your strength modifier, is that like a 15 or a 16?
So actually, the reason it's a plus, it's a flat and rather than a -2 because I actually am proficient with it. Um,
Gotcha.
so and then my strength modifier would be a +3.
Okay. Yeah, so you can pick somebody up and you can kind of like question them real quick. And, like the first person you might grab might not have any like real like answers for you. I saw everybody gathering and it seemed something was happening here. I can't tell myself. It's too far away. And then like getting frustrated with this person, you grab up the next person. The whole time you're still kind of like pushing through the throng and kind of making your way forward. And the next person with a little bit more understanding was he. He had said there's signs of some terrible doom coming upon the city. It's horrific inside, and just kind of like this person doesn't really know, but as you kind of like move through a few different people, kind of using the act of like picking them up and interrogating them to also move yourself forward and further up, you're basically coming to realize a lot of these people stopped because there are people who are stopped here. Some of them have stopped because they've come to understand that this person who's yelling at the crowd seems to be prophetizing some horrific doom in the city, and that gathered people's attention.
Gotcha. And is this would this be something unusual, like or they're kind of constantly people like haranguing crowds and doomsayers kind of all over the place?
I would say it kind of fits both ways here. It's certainly not unknown to the city to have prophets of doom. You guys have the spire is a constant reminder of the evil that is in this world and the fact that two of the strongest powers of evil lived in this city. That's what the spire is. Many people don't necessarily remember this in the most like um, full form, but it is one of those things like the spire has a certain sense of fear. Like you look up at it and it seems very normal for many days of a week kind of thing, but it is still its own kind of reminder of the evils in the world. And many people still remember that, especially like elves and like the longer lived races. Um, you guys still have undead powers that are in a constant battle from within the necropolis to try to make it into the city at large. There's plenty of reason for this to be entirely normal. But it is one of those things where when it affects your life, things are a little bit different. Like, you don't necessarily ever expect it to be here today so much as like it's not surprising, say in like the temple district where people deal in kind of like doom and gloom sells religion kind of thing.
Gotcha. Okay, yeah. So part of so part of Davros is just kind of like he wants to think, gosh, it's just another, you know, um time a dozen, but he kind of, I think he would like instinctively make some sort of kind of like a superstitious warding gesture, maybe off in the direction of the spire. Um and kind of, and part of him is thinking, oh, this is just kind of par for the course, but then part of him is thinking, but now it's, this is where I sent them, so he's can't help from being a little bit um unsure, so he's going to essentially continue trying to push through the crowd, essentially to get sight of this person speaking.
Gotcha. Let me get a strength check here from you. Or even athletics.
If it's athletics, that would be a 15 then.
Gotcha. So as you kind of push through the rest of the crowd, you're starting to get closer and closer where you can see this person is speaking from not only near where Nina's house is, like basically where you are hoping to go, but you're starting to recognize that this person has kind of like created their little parapet right off of the road and essentially like right off of like the door stoop to this like friend of the family's house. You are going right to where this person is. And as you get closer and closer, you basically hear them kind of speaking along these lines of the first signs of the end are come. The children of the mark have been born, and now comes the beast. And you basically hear kind of like verbiage along these lines of like marked children, and basically like some sort of kind of like mysterious beast that seems to be like also kind of tied to the sign of evil portents.
Yeah, so I think yeah, Davros is going to kind of do another kind of maybe like warding or blessing gesture. I have him. He's kind of a just follows the main Church of Lothian. Probably not like particularly devoutly, but just kind of like a you know not exactly like a lapsed Catholic, but basically like that's that's the normal religion. So he has like his superstitions, but he's not um, particularly religious. But as he's kind of like hearing this, I think he's going to just like kind of try to barge right up to the speaker himself and be what what beast are you talking about? What's going on here?
Roll a perception check as you like bust up to him, and then also let me have you roll a persuasion here.
All right, so perception would be an 11. Persuasion will be flat 8.
Gotcha. So as you kind of get past the crowd and kind of get to this point, you do start to notice that there are actual commissars guards, men of the city who are actually guarding this house in particular. And you can see that like the line of the people in this throng has actually been held back by them more than that this speaker is here like holding their attention. So as you kind of get through and you push into this and you start to kind of like make this accusation towards him, he more or less still kind of points up and in a somewhat like kind of raving manner, just pointing to the house. The beast has risen. The consummation of the children is nigh. And he just kind of like rants and raves about these marked children and this rising of the beasts. Not really too much more to get from him, as pretty quickly you're going to kind of come to the realization this is just another kind of soothsayer who's like stark raving mad. If he's saying anything that's any sense, it's probably coincidental.
Gotcha. So yeah, Davros will kind of like shake his head and just like kind of spit and say this is a waste of time, and he's going to. But now, as he's gotten up here and seeing that there are actually guards kind of keeping some of the crowds back, he's going to uh, head towards one of them. If they're, I don't know if they like would know like by the insignia if there's one who looks like they might be in charge, like a sergeant or something like that.
I think kind of looking around, you might find initially that there's not necessarily anybody who's like ranked left outside right now. Um, but basically, when you approach the first guard, you're just going to be kind of like ordered to halt. That the city guard has kind of I don't want to say like shut it down like a crime scene kind of thing, but I feel like that's kind of like the idea that I'm going for. That they're essentially going to just try to stop you as if you're a passerby. So I think maybe you'll get from the guard something to the lines of like, uh, halt there, sir. None of the throng can go any further. This is Commissar's business. If you have any with the Commissar, you'd have to see him to move any further.
I know the man inside, and he'll give Ninor's name. And I know my son Dalton. He was last I saw him. He was headed this way. You got to tell me what's going on in there. So he's not physically like putting any hands on the guard because he doesn't want to be arrested, but he's definitely trying to essentially kind of use his just to like his size to kind of like intimidate this guy into maybe answering him.
So the guard's going to pull out like just a little bit of parchment and scribble down the names that you've given him here, and then he'll kind of look to you to question your own name. You say you know the owner of this abode, and that is Ninota, and your son, Dalton Demarque, and you are
Davros and Marcus.
and then he'll write down like that third name, and then he's just going to kind of like tear that little bit of parchment up and just kind of like fold it real quick, and then he's going to walk over to the next closest guard, kind of bringing him a little bit closer to you before he like hands them that little piece of paper, sends him like points him off towards the house, and just he'll return in a few moments, and he's like, uh, Davros, I'd like to ask you to wait here just a few moments, and we'll be back to you presently. I believe we have questions, and it would be best to discuss them elsewhere.
Uh, yeah, so Davros is he's kind of looking impatient, but he'll kind of just like let out a snort and maybe like tapping his foot and crossing his arms over his chest. Fine, fine. Wait here.
So, as you're waiting in this kind of moment, you're going to start to hear the ringing of the I think they use a bell from the actual firehouse, which is basically just to the southwest of where you are here. So you'll start to hear that bell ringing. When that happens, you're actually going to kind of gain a sense that there's smoke rising from that same direction. It's north of where the bell is, but right now there's basically smoke starting to rise from this general area, just kind of to the west of where you all are. And craziness is going to ensue pretty quickly. That throng of people is very quickly going to become like a death trap of madness as these people start to push and run in many different directions and start to trample over each other. Let me have you make a dexterity saving throw real quick.
All right. So that should be an 11.
All right, so there's definitely some kind of like pushing and danger to like you and the guards there, but as most people are trying to get away from, um, essentially, like you guys are the closest side of that whole area of people to like where the fire and the smoke is coming from. So most people are actually trying to get further away from you. The danger to yourselves is definitely reduced more um, moment by moment. And overall, you and that particular guard who's closest to you are very quickly out of general danger. It doesn't take long for the same soldier who took the note to kind of come out of the house, and you'll be followed. That will be followed by somebody who's actually wearing, or rather, kind of holding like his helmet with like a little bit more plumage on it, and you'll kind of see as like a captain of a guard, or like a admiral, not admiral, like I'm terrible with ranks as I've never been in any sort of military service. But let's stick to the idea like a captain above like normal guardsmen at this point. And he kind of comes out, and two things are going to happen. I think first, while he's still like up near the house, kind of standing maybe 15 or 20 feet overhead, as this is still like kind of like a higher rise point in the city, it always rises to the west of you. You kind of see as he like takes a moment to like look out over the area and start to assess like these rising points of smoke in the distance there. And then after a few moments, he's going to kind of return to you. And, well, um, this bodes problematic. My apologies. And he'll kind of like shuffle his helmet and like lead out a hand. Captain Simon Yaraya, it's a pleasure to meet you. And he like flips open that little piece of paper. Davros Demarques.
Uh, yeah, so Davros will kind of reach out, give like a quick shake, and yes, yes, uh, nice to meet you, Captain Simon. And he will also be kind of be like glancing off towards the smoke. Um, but can you tell me what's going on?
I was hoping to hear what you had to share. You were coming to check on your son and this Nino.
I hadn't. I'd heard he'd been Ninor had been not feeling well. I just asked my son to check in on him, and that was must have been a month ago now. I mean, my boy's not always the most prompt, but this is a long time to be missing, even for him. Figured I'd come and find out for myself what's going on.
So he's kind of like a more or less like typical kind of detective kind of feel. As you like have this conversation, he'll be noting things down in like a little bit of a parchment thing pretty regularly here. So a lot of what you say gets a couple of scratches inside of his notepad. Um, there'll rarely be more than a few things said that he's not going to scratch something into his pad as you guys have a discussion here. But he kind of goes over these little things, and he'll like check some of those dates, like when you last sent Dem here, what you understood was wrong with Ninor. So you were of the understanding that Ninor was ill, and your son has healing capabilities. He's prepared to save those who are deathly ill.
no cleric, if that's what you mean. I just wanted him to check and see what was going on,
And
depending on what
he'll
he found.
he'll have questions like this that are basically it's going to get to one of those points where from your perspective things will get like highly frustrating, as it's clearly these questions have nothing to do with anything of importance. Like, no, Dem was not a healer. Like, that's not what's going on here. And, like thoughts like that are kind of like running through your head. And eventually you're just going to feel kind of like a full kind of like, what are you giving me the runaround for? And eventually you'll kind of get these general feelings, and frustration is going to kind of get to its maximum, where you kind of have a, let me get, um, just like a wisdom check here.
Sure.
And this is again far more like that there's a long conversation of like, this guy's asking the wrong questions, he's not giving you any information, and it's just a question of like really getting at.
Yeah, it's definitely, and Davros is definitely the type who, like, he's like trying to hold down the urge, just like grab this guy and shake him. Um,
So eventually you get to this point where essentially you do boil over and kind of lose your cool. And that's going to be a point where this person kind of like jotting down things like, almost like snaps shut the leather that they've got their paper like folded inside of. And with a little bit of like a wry smile, kind of looks to you and it's good. Perhaps then you do know as little as you would seem. Your son doesn't seem to have been in that home for quite some time. I would wager no one has been there for quite some time. But something horrific has happened in that place. And I don't believe anyone should have to see what remains behind. I don't think the illness that you understood your friend to have had was what they would have described it to most people. Perhaps not even they understood what was really wrong. But needless to say, seems that they were consumed from within, and something came that has destroyed much of that home.
why in the bloody hell didn't you tell me that from the start? He's gonna try to like kind of calm himself down, like maybe take a breath and kind of shake his head and
It's
so
hard to tell whether the carnage in there is just from the passing of your friend Ninor, or if it goes beyond. There's more blood than I think there should be, and less body parts than one would expect.
I want to see for myself.
So as you guys have kind of been like in this area, like in the questioning, I think you'd probably actually be starting to almost like head up Old Sea Road and actually move towards, I want to say the Temple District might have the closest like um um police headquarters, but it also might be in the necropolis.
Oh,
So
gotcha. So we've been kind of walking as got
yeah. So at some point though, you're basically seeing like that those fires are kind of expansive there, and it's just too close to actually where like the station is. So let's see. Check the Temple District. Oh, see, I knew the Temple District, and I did that right. I cut off part of the Guildsman District. It's to the east. So where's it in the Temple District? I don't even see it here. I see. Okay, they're in the center. So near Minaret. So that's probably pretty far away. About North Market. They're in the center as well. Yeah, so it might actually be that they're kind of walking you towards the necropolis and the guard towers that basically like sit along the necropolis. All of those are little guard stations where he could get you like to a place to actually like question you. And that's generally part of what his questioning was to like kind of break you down in kind of like a good cop, bad cop sign kind of thing. He wanted to see you break. Um, when you kind of insist on seeing for yourself, I'm curious what you expect that you will know or have to learn by seeing things for yourself.
he said there's a body parts, at least a few of them. I just want to make sure my son's not in there.
When we are able to quell the fires, I believe I can take you through the home.
Fine.
But for now, I think it might need to remain your understanding that there are not enough body parts for them to be someone else's.
Fine. Fine. If it makes anything quicker, I can help with the they'll put out the flames. I imagine Tolis. I don't know if they have their own professional, but it would be kind of also like a volunteer sort of um, like people who live nearby kind of form uh, almost like assembly line fire, gangs to put out flames kind of thing. And given he lives in the Guildsman district, you know,
Yeah, this is kind of like the state of like the start of some of like the like first fire crews where there's a blend of it's for public good, but they're not trying to save property. They're trying to prevent the fire from spreading to the next place. So a lot of what the fire crew ends up doing is trying to make sure like if this place is on fire, you basically like try to destroy what you can so it self conflagrates and prevent it from spreading to the next place. So it's a lot of like putting water on nearby locations and trying to wreck places that are already on fire so they don't have a chance to spread further. And it's kind of one of those things where yes, there is a private like organization of guards who are essentially firemen, but there also are, yeah, bucket brigades of like normal people who can certainly help. Um, but overall, um, I'd say maybe they keep you for like another hour or so of kind of like questioning you about what you know before they send you on your way. And basically tell you like when the fire is kind of handled, we'll figure out if you can like do a walkthrough of the house. But they'll basically send you on your way, and you're welcome to basically return to the area and try to sneak past the guards who are already there, or you can actually go and try to help put out the fire. In which case, we can kind of go forward with that. But essentially, it's just kind of like, is this just another random happening, or is there something, what's kind of going on here? But it's just kind of another big thing that seems to be happening on top of your actual life issues.
Yeah, it seems like I think Davros would be he'd want to at least see like okay what's burning um he's wondering like is this a coincidence, is this and I'm not sure he'd be smart enough to think of okay maybe I can use this distraction to try to sneak into the house. um so I think his first instinct would be to try and essentially see like just what's burning, what's going on with the fire.
Gotcha. Let me just have you do an investigation here, as maybe you go like around from the north and you kind of come down between, what's it, like Iron Street and Valderast.
So that will be 17.
Gotcha. So yeah. As far as like the Gilsman district goes, like there's a large section of it is indeed on fire here, as you can kind of see that there's probably like a 2 or 3 block radius that is kind of burning out between like Valderast and Curtin Street, like and like Old Sea Road. There's a large section of that. Probably about a third of it has already burned, and there's probably like 3 more main fires that are still kind of raging in that area, like around like Cattle Street and Foggy Way, like the Stew Pots and Constable Way, and then a little bit more on like Hodge Head and kind of living that. Like it kind of is expanded out, but it's also kind of burnt out in other sections. But you can kind of see as it's still like an ever going kind of progress of fighting it. What you do kind of notice.
You may have cut off, Mara.
Oh, my bad. So let's say like you spot some of the locations are some like older embers and kind of like already kind of burned down just into embers and charcoals. my my apologies. And
Really?
then some of the other ones are like contrary to where the wind is actually going. There's other locations that have actually like caught fire upwind, and they don't make sense with how like the wind should have carried the fire. Like the fire into like Luna Street and Hodgehead makes sense. The wind is blowing west to east. It kind of should do that. But the fires that have continued towards Constable Way, that doesn't quite make sense because it shouldn't be able to go like west and south when they're like coming from like the southwest. So you kind of have like 2 of the fires kind of make sense. Like the east side that's still on fire is going with the wind. The west side that's still on fire is kind of like older burn from where this place started, But the fire where it's going like towards the actual firehouse, like between Stewpot and Constable Way, that section is going contrary to the wind and contrary to the kind of timing. So you kind of pick up a little bit, maybe to see like there are oddities about how this is burning. Um, and I don't know if we ever isolated what exactly kind of guildsman Davros was, but let's say on some level, kind of in the smithy function, maybe that's his affinity to fire.
Yeah, I basically ended up kind of essentially like a blacksmith or some sort of smith. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'd say with that idea, like that you're already on a blacksmith kind of idea, then maybe he recognizes like those fires nearing towards where the firehouse is that are kind of encroaching into the Constable Way now. Those fires are acting contrary to like the nature of fire.
Yeah. So I think he kind of, as he sees this, he's going to want to kind of caught up in everything that's going on. He's going to want to investigate. He might try and grab like if there's like any nearby guards and or at least try and get their attention and be like, hey, kind of pointing off towards the fire. Like that's not right. Um, but he's kind of regardless of whether he gets their attention, he's going to start moving in that direction to investigate himself. Again, kind of caught up in everything going on, not really thinking.
All right, so this isn't you trying to like gather a guard from the house. This is actually like helping the fires. You're kind of noticing this.
Right. Yeah.
Gotcha. Um, let me have you feel like maybe roll a persuasion, and you can have advantage as you kind of like call it out and like kind of describe like why the fire doesn't seem to be kind of proper to you.
So that'll be a 10 then.
Solid. 10's the advantage. um, yeah. So as you kind of like call this out, that there's kind of like an issue at hand. Um, you and like the guard who you grab, like his shoulder, uh, you're almost like kind of pointing out these details and the screaming and the happening that is this like section of the city catching fire. This is again kind of along the ideas like this is not unheard of. It happens pretty regularly that the city catches fire. The danger is that at any given time, the entire city can go up in flames if you don't quell it. So it's severely dangerous, but it's also this is part of the dangers of city life. But as you guys are kind of like gathering this, the firemen, the fire departments, like what their function is inside of the city is being prepared for these things. And you kind of get some people to kind of like focus on that. The guard kind of assists in it. And as you're kind of working closer with them, kind of like trying to quell this like oddity of flames that are kind of picking up along this side, you're going to notice that there's kind of like front to the screaming, and there's things that are happening in a house that's like two or three doors kind of now like southwest of where these flames are, and it draws your attention just enough, and as you go and see, you feel like you see a like bit of movement kind of in like the shadow of the flames, that just kind of catches your eye like in an instant. Let me have you roll a perception check.
13.
Um, and you kind of like look to the guard, looks back at you, and just has kind of the same response of like, a drop jaw as you both kind of like see this pale white green kind of like rough skinned creature that seems to be a quadruped running bipedally, seems to be about the size of like a small house cat, but it's like bulky and muscular, and it just sticks out as a very odd sight. And both of you kind of see it in the flash, kind of running past as you like look to these other screens, and you kind of see it like just kind of like move into another alley. And you kind of both have this moment where you like look to each other, recognizing like, did you see that? I saw it too. And it's got both of your attention. He's already moving off towards it, towards whatever that was, almost as if the fire has become like a non-thing. What are you thinking here?
Yeah, so I think Davros is looking back towards the screaming. Um, so the sorry, from where the screaming that he heard, is that within the flames?
No, no, that's like outside of it. It's like a little bit southwest of the flames. So maybe like you're looking across Constable Way, and it's now on like the southwestern side of the street. And like the thing has kind of moved down the alley, maybe like just kind of northwest of where the firehouse is on Constable Way.
Gotcha. Yeah, so he's kind of torn in the moment between checking on the screaming or following the guard after whatever that thing was. Um, but I think he's going to follow after the guard and try to catch this thing.
Gotcha. So as you move into that little alleyway and kind of like the flames are maybe like kind of 2 blocks kind of behind you already, and you're getting away from some of this like really strong heat. The air around you still smells very much of like burning wood and all of these kind of like strong, arid, just like choking smells. Your lungs are not necessarily adverse to this. Like, this is something that you kind of live through pretty regularly here. But it is much more than you would necessarily be used to, like, in the actual breeze of a night kind of thing. But as you kind of like come around this corner and you kind of step into this little alley, there's a little bit of quiet. There's some kind of like trash along like a wall to the like left of you, and seems to be nice and open along the right. Goes about 20 or 30 feet forward, walking slowly side by side with the guard, like to your left. Everything seems silent.
So I think so. Davros at this point has kind of drawn out his. He carries a maul. I'm thinking essentially it's not like a specifically crafted like weapon of war. It's essentially something that he built, kind of designed himself. So it might be pretty crude looking, but effective looking, just like a big kind of
Yeah, so
hammer.
that could, yeah, solid mall option is like quite literally um a worker's maul would be like a very heavy uh like triangular shaped hammer that's essentially used for like splitting the wood that you need to stoke your fire. So it is essentially like for doing all kinds of things from large firewood down to splitting into much smaller, finer pieces for getting a fire started. But theoretically, your maul would quite literally be, um, I mean, that's your livelihood, is your ability to create fire.
So he's pulling that out. He's kind of looking to the guard. Seems quiet. Is there any thinking if he's gonna try and see like is there any sort of blood trail if this thing had attacked something. Maybe that was the screaming, and maybe it's if there's any sort of like dripping blood or anything like that.
Roll a perception check.
And that will be an 11 straight.
So you can see that there is a little bit of blood kind of like drawn up the center of this little alleyway, and it seems to kind of like move into some of that trash off to the left side.
So I think Davros is going to kind of like put his hand on the guard's shoulder and kind of point off towards the kind of like the refuse. Kind of grip his maul a little bit tighter and start. I think trying to. I don't know how wide the alley is, potentially moving towards it. I think he actually would probably be prepared to just kind of like smash them all into this pile of refuse without knowing if anything's actually there, almost just trying to like scatter it.
Gotcha. Let me have you make an attack at disadvantage as you basically just like swing into the trash.
Yeah. So that would be a 10.
Gotcha. So as you smash into the trash here and just like swing for where you expect this trail of blood kind of leads, you'll like bash into it. Like some of this is like say like old smash pottery. Some of this is like metallic things. Little bits of this are actual like food waste. But by and large, this is just kind of like scattered um non non-organic things, and you kind of like smash into it. There's an explosion of noise and movement as these little pieces start to scatter across the actual like area um of this little alley. But you don't seem to hit anything. And as everything kind of like comes to a little bit of calm here, you're kind of like trying to gain a sense of what or where is anything kind of happening. And let's see, you're going to, as something lands on your back right shoulder, and it's going to try to kind of the uh what is it, the deltoid, like the kind of like triangle of your shoulder blade, and bites down into your delt. Should hit with a 21.
Yep, that'll definitely hit.
And it's going to do just 3 points of piercing damage at present, as you feel like this like 4 or 5 pound thing like land on top of your shoulder blade, bite down into like the arm that you swung with, and it already kind of like leaps away from you. You don't necessarily see it in the moment as it does this, but what are you kind of thinking as this happens?
Yeah, I think as this kind of thing lands and kind of bites through. I imagine he's not wearing armor, but I would imagine he might have like a leather apron kind of thing, but it kind of like bites right through that and into his shoulder. Um, I think he'd give like a shout out. I think he'd be kind of enraged at this point. Um, and I think he would be almost kind of like blindly turning around as it like kind of leaps off of him, and I think just kind of again blindly swinging his mace. thinking if it's leaping off, he's going to try to almost like bat it out of the air.
Gotcha. So like while you're like, are you going into an actual rage? Is that your actual thought when you say you're going enraged?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, as this thing bites
Gotcha.
down on.
So as it like leaps down and bites into you, the guard's going to kind of exclaim, like, there it is, like something to that effect as it like swings out. The guard misses entirely as it like leaps off of your shoulder blade. You can take your bonus action to go into a rage, and still without like an actual sight on this thing, you're going to make attacks at disadvantage. Um, I feel like you can still go reckless if you would like to, though, and give yourself advantage at level 1.
I think reckless attack comes at level 2.
Oh, okay, okay.
Yes, it'll still just be a disadvantaged attack here. Yes, that's a 9.
Gotcha. So this thing's like kind of like leaping like down at your feet and like up on top of the two of you. It's more or less like kind of swarming around the two of you at present, but it's somewhere inside of this alley. It's not like getting far away from you guys so much as it's just not staying like in front of your view kind of situation here. Um, Both of you have kind of already missed it once, as it kind of like stopped and gave itself a little bit more of a time to actually like bite down into you. This next time, it's actually going to attack the guard, and this time it's going to have to crit him, I think, right off of it. So an 8. So it should hit the guard, and gonna do 3 piercing damage to the guard here as it bites into him. Oh wait, no, my bad. I mixed up the hit points with his AC. So he's actually going to bite into the guard's armor. Um, kind of leaps off. Uh, Guard can swing for it. Two's gonna make it a miss. Looks like the two's solid enough. So yeah, the guard kind of again like swings wide as this thing like kind of like jumps out and trying to bite like into like the inside of his leg, just like chomps down on the bracer on his leg and kind of like guards his femur from being like chewed on by this thing. And it'll kind of go back around to you. You guys are still kind of just like isolated around this thing as it's kind of like biting and darting around you two, using its like alacrity at speed to essentially keep itself defended.
Yeah, I think Davros is just kind of like shouting, still kind of enraged. He's like, "Stand still, you bloody cat!" Not sure what this thing actually is, but yeah, I think he's still just essentially swinging his maul, trying to. He's hoping kind of one good hit will kind of knock it, knock it for a bit. So I think for now he's still just going for that. Nope, that'll be an 8. And actually, do you mind if I just step away for 5 minutes, make some coffee?
Oh, 100%. Go ahead.
All right, I'll be back in a couple minutes.
My bad. I stepped away too.
Oh, no worries. I just realized there was no chat for me to put it in. So,
Oh yeah, that one's meant to be like the guild hall is like the Praemus stuff.
oh, gotcha. Okay.
There's no worries though. I mean, when we're doing solo missions, there's not a big deal. Um, yeah. So the little creature, I think, I forget who 2 was, but I want to say It is the guard. I feel like maybe I had you as two. But regardless, it like leaps up onto one of you, kind of like trying to like bite, but it's almost like as somebody's swinging and it's leaping off just as quick to kind of like stay out of the way and does not get its teeth down into one of you. Um, so I think that would continue it on towards the guard. And realistically, if you want to play the guard, that would be great. It's just a +3 with a spear, dealing a d6 or yeah, d6 +1 damage.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, I think the Guardles, yeah, just continuing to try to stab and skewer it with the spear. Nope, that'll be a crit miss.
And,
Um,
and then that would be back around to
yeah,
Davros.
and Davros, I think, he's thinking this the maul is too slow a weapon, so he's dropping it, and he's essentially just trying to punch out at it. And if he took the tavern brawler feat, so if he manages to essentially connect, he's going to try to grab it and grapple it as well with
Gotcha.
a bonus action. Okay, that would be a 19.
So solid hit there. I believe Tavern Brawler, like, it does not give you a d4 damage die, or does it?
It does.
Okay, so you're a d4 for your damage die plus your strength.
Yep. So +3, so 4 damage, and then attempt to essentially grapple it.
Gotcha. Yeah. So roll a strength athletics for yourself.
And would this also be a disadvantage or just straight roll here?
Um, I don't know. Theoretically, this thing is essentially dodging. Um, I don't know offhand if dodge changes how athletics work, or as far as grapples.
I feel like it would make sense for it to impose disadvantage, but however you want to play it.
Okay, I feel like
Well,
maybe I have advantage on its test.
gotcha. Okay. So if that's athletics, that would be a 24 for me.
Yeah, there's no way I'm going to beat that one. So as you get your hands on this creature, you can kind of see like it is vastly the size of a cat. It is predominantly a big giant head with kind of like a stumpy tail. So like when you grab on between like its four legs, it's almost like it has five appendages. Like the head is the body. There's arms coming out of like right behind like the jaw, and there's arms coming out of like towards the like midway of the tail. But like this whole creature is kind of like a long, kind of slug-like almost shape of like a big headed creature with like a big stumpy tail that's like say a foot and a half. And then it has like four arm like and leg like appendages that come out beside that. But it's a very odd looking creature to get your eyes on. And in the moment of kind of like slowing it down, it's just kind of like further in rage and where it's just kind of like chomping down and trying to bite here. After you, I think is it. And so I don't see any reason why I can't still. take the dodge action. It's still kind of like jumping and pushing and like very difficult to control in your hands, despite you effectively still do also have it grappled. But I think it's just going to try to bite down into you here. So 17 should hit. So as you kind of get your hands on it to grapple it, it almost like bites down into the closest part of your hand, trying to control it. And it's going to deal 5 piercing damage to you. So 2 damage.
Yep, gotcha. And I think the guard is kind of seeing Davros is at least somewhat got a hand on it. He's kind of like hold it still, and trying to stab at it. I think would he still be a disadvantage? I guess if it's dodging.
Yeah, technically it is still dodging in your hands.
Gotcha. So what you said +3, so 18.
Yeah, that's definitely a hit.
And 1d6.
Correct, +1.
Okay, so 7.
All right, so as he pierces through it with the spear, that is going to be kind of the killing blow, where he can essentially like basically find his spear like into this creature, and as you almost like skewer it down the spear, the thing's going to go limp, like as it's actively like fighting Davros, and he's using his strength to kind of manhandle this thing and almost like insert it onto this spear, as if they're like chefs preparing for a meal, like they're skewering this thing as a bit of like teamwork. And once you get kind of like partway past like the mouth, there's just this kind of point where there's a little like click of bone, and then all of a sudden the thing just goes limp. And kind of looking it over a little bit more, you see a little bit more of kind of this like very odd anatomy that this creature is.
Yeah, so as it goes limp, Davros is kind of like he's wiping his hands on the front of his like leather apron and kind of like disgust and um like what the hell's is that thing? Kind of looking to the guard. Uh,
So again,
Davros.
I'm not an artist, but that's kind of what you're looking at, like impaled on the spear. Like you've got this thing that is just like essentially like a slug, kind of impaled on this. Looking over it, you see like this massive teeth, um, somewhat like the facial features you would expect on things. It has effectively eyes, some sort of nostrils, and then like the mouth is kind of like the lower end of this like general face of this thing. Um, has a little bit of kind of like a ridge line, kind of behind where like the spine is, that runs like basically from between the eyes all the way back down towards the tail. Uh, Looking over it, I think it's safe to kind of like examine and recognize that this is like a tadpole of some sorts that already has like 4 legs sprouting out of it. But again, this thing probably weighs like 10, 15 pounds.
Yeah, so Davros is thinking, one, if this is uh, like a baby or an adolescent, then how big do these things get? Um, but he's also thinking, we need to maybe we maybe there's someone who can knows what this thing is, identify it. Um, so I think he's going to basically suggest we essentially take it, but he at this point, what about those? What about those screams? What if that's where it came out of? We should. check on that.
Roll an investigation here, and you can have advantage as you've got the guard with you right now.
So it will be a 17.
Gotcha. So, like, hopping into, like, one of the closest kind of, like, houses to where you expect the screams come from. Maybe it's a little bit much to say one of the houses. But let's say, like, you kind of have, like a group of people who are, like, nearish by, who they very quickly like confirmed like they had seen something and it startled them. One of them had screamed, and you get something, basically kind of like following a little bit of like a line like that. The screams seem to have been some of the people who were startled by this creature. Eventually, when you actually like kind of display the creature, it's like the person is just as horrified to see it as to confirm like what they saw was real. But it was like kind of that level of they were almost like outside, like gawking at the fire, and were surprised to see something beyond happening. Um, yeah, I was kind of trying to lead to the idea that this thing was causing people to accidentally cause the fire expanding in this direction. But I feel like I just don't have a good idea as to like why it was still happening, because I feel like people should have been outside of their houses and not at risk of burning alive inside of their homes at this point. But I was kind of getting at the idea like, say somebody was inside like cooking or had like an open flame and got startled as this thing came through, and they would knock the next flame that continued to like kind of spread the flame like southwesterly. Almost that this thing was like creating a trail that was the cause of these fires.
Gotcha. Okay, that was kind of my. I mean, not about this creature specifically, but when once you kind of described Davros noticing that the fire, parts of the some of the fire didn't seem to be following the kind of the prevailing winds or what would be natural. He was thinking, okay, maybe somebody's using the natural fires to um, set something, but yeah, kind of like getting to that understanding, like, okay, this creature's been running through this area. I think it would be not too much of a stretch to think, okay, maybe somehow this, if this was running through some of these houses, these buildings, that could
Yeah, my
explain it.
brain's just not like giving me a whole lot of creativity on where to go with the idea. But yeah, in general, the idea is to connect that you all have this creature that is going kind of northeast to southeast. And it was kind of causing some of the initial actual fires, and then some of the other side fires, while they were not necessarily like meant to be, were natural enough in how they were happening.
Yeah, so that makes, I guess, maybe Davros is thinking, if this thing started the whole thing, if we can trace back where the fire originated, find out where this thing came from, if there's more of them.
So I would say, on some level, that's kind of where you almost have like a little bit of a like kind of flash forward in time, when the actual fires are a little bit more handled. Maybe that guard and the original constable, Captain Simon, kind of come together, and you guys are like poking and prodding at this thing. They bring you through the actual house again. Um, so you kind of have this like almost reconvening, and you've got more or less kind of three different paths to kind of go forward. Look for somebody who might be an expert in this creature or who might know something else about the creature. Look for the actual like starting point of the fire with somebody who might be essentially like maybe one of the firemen who might be like kind of an expert at locating the origin of the fire. Or like get the walkthrough of Nina's old house.
Yeah, I think Davros's initial idea to wanting to get a walkthrough has kind of been pushed to the side with like the finding and fighting this creature, and I think um he wants to know what this thing is. Um must be you know someone who can tell us what this thing is.
Alright. I actually want to kind of say, give me a minute because I'm sure there's a really good expert inside of Tolis who the guards have access to. So I'm
Yeah,
not sure if you've like already like gotten your coffee, but if you want to like take another quick break here, just give me a few moments.
yeah, no, that works for me too. Yeah, I'll be back in a few. No rush. Okay, I'm back.
Alrighty. Um. So yeah, I think you'll get taken with Simon. Um. Probably. I don't even think I have it set yet. Up into Old Town. Just kind of probably among the closest locations um, Davros would ever really be to the actual spire itself.
Yeah, and he's also Davros is also kind of like he is maybe like just taking some strips of like linen or something, trying to kind of wrap up his the bite wounds, but he's also kind of worried about like this thing probably has a nasty, this thing is a nasty looking mouth. He's worried about also wanted to get that checked on. But the figuring out what this thing is, he'd be going with the guards, but that would be also at the back of his mind.
I believe it is in our interest to seek those who are most adept at fighting things that do not belong here. This creature is far from anything that I have ever seen, and I know of few who would be prepared to discuss its existence. But I do have connections within the Blade Chapel, and hopefully we can find answers there. So, up in the very northern side of Old Town, we are going to have you going to the Emperor's Row.
And is the
That
Blade Chapel something that Davros would have heard of?
I think is a local. It's probably just as likely to be mysterious as not. Um, but this is the Knights of the Pale. They're one of the knightly orders that essentially exists by the funding of um, the Church of Lothian, and essentially state funding. So it's kind of a blend between a religious order and like a state order. But the Knights of the Pale and the Blade Chapel, I don't see any reason for you not to know of their existence, but they would be just as mysterious as they were something that you clearly know and understand what they do.
Gotcha. So he's heard the name, but he doesn't know anything about. Yeah, makes sense.
But the Blade Chapel is up in like the northern section, right where it says Emperor's Road there. It's really, really hard to see the actual like circling job that I did up there for you.
Oh, I think I see it. 39.
Yeah. So the actual like trip up and into Old Town is, if the two of you are walking, it probably would be almost like a 40-minute walk kind of thing. But in this occasion, Captain Simon might actually get like an actual like a taxi for you, which is essentially like a horse-drawn carriage, and you actually like ride up and into the Emperor's Road and up and into the Blade Chapel. You'll very quickly, once you're in Old Town a little bit more proper, these are the original um, battlements and the original settlement of the city. So it itself already has kind of like a little bit of like defensible kind of, it sits above the rest of the city a little bit, but even more so the noble quarters have like a cliff on the western side that separates them from Old Town, because this was the original settled area, but the actual old keep, the old castleation, is essentially where like the noble quarters are now. So this section here is set off and above the rest of the city and is like astonishing and kind of like wow inspiring. There's almost as much greenery here as there is like cement and stonework, but compared to the nobles' quarters, it's even more so. You still have the nobles' quarters kind of staring down at you. But this would be kind of like an astonishing little bit of an experience here to kind of have um, as someone like Davros, who's just still kind of like dabbling into a world that's, you may never have really even thought about its existence prior to this. Um, as far as like the wife of Davros, this is very close to where she would travel daily, as like Crossing Street is the northern exit that goes over to the river gate, and that's the district that she works in. So she's often in the company kind of these people. But you can go into this area and you basically will kind of be brought into this like magnificent mansion where there are people who are essentially um, in different variances of dress, all of them very clearly still like military garb. There are many people who are training all sorts of different weapons in the different, like you would walk through like an atrium. You have different like gardens where you might have people who are out there like battling. This is very clearly still an order of war, despite eventually coming into a library where the captain kind of takes a few moments to like discuss in whispers with one person who's just like a cloaked individual, and then sometime later you're basically going to be greeted by this person who is essentially like, you can hear the kind of clinks of metal, but they seem to be walking around as if they are moving, kind of like somebody who's just wearing robes. But as a blacksmith, let me have you roll a perception here. You can have advantage.
20.
Um, so as this person kind of approaches, kind of pick up a little bit, you kind of pick up a little bit of a sign that they're moving lightly. They're moving with like ease and with dexterity, but they also still like have that kind of sound of steel. And you can kind of sense like this is somebody who's wearing not only really fine armor that's well made to their body's anatomy, but also that this is likely someone who is clad in something of the mithril kind of state of steel, where it's extremely light, extremely strong. This is not somebody who is hindered by their armor so much as the armor has become kind of a part of their body. Um, but they are basically going to kind of come forward, still cloaked and rather mysterious. Like you can't really see much of their face, other than maybe like some wrinkles of their chin as they approach. Their hands are kind of tucked together, so they're almost in that like kind of prayer state, kind of walking forward with their elbows like close to their rib cage and their hands like in front of their sternum, as they kind of approach, and with a little bit of a bow to you and the captain, you'll basically hear as the person kind of says, "Welcome to the library. I am Sister Torella. Am I to understand you have brought a creature that does not belong? You have found it in the Guildsman district."
Yeah, so kind of all throughout, as we've been kind of traveling through and into Old Town and now into the Blade Chapel and the library, Davros is like not at all able to hide that he's kind of looking around a little slack jawed, like maybe his wife has like kind of told him a little bit about this place, but he's like almost like kind of just like, oh, she's exaggerating. Um, but no, he's kind of seeing it for himself. So it and he's kind of like his attention is kind of like drawn to the armor, being a smith himself at first. So he kind of like it takes him like a moment to actually kind of realize he's just been asked a question. Um, so then he'll kind of like and he'll try to kind of return the bow, but clearly not something that he is used to. So he's kind of looks a bit awkward as he does it. Um, but he'll kind of uh, give like a grunt and nod, and I show it to the sister here, and he'll go on to try and explain. Um, yeah, just like kind of chase it into an alley. Bugger was quick, but we finally got it. Yeah, you've never seen the like of it. Uh, Captain here seems to think you might be able to help us identify it.
So, assuming it's kind of like wrapped in some like linens, essentially to kind of keep it to, she kind of like moves over onto like a marble kind of desk and like unwraps it, and you'll see as she kind of like takes out like just like almost like a silvered quill, and just seems to kind of like poke around in its mouth, kind of like open up its jaw, and you see as she kind of like pulls out like its tongue almost extends like a foot and a half even now, as it's like starting to lose like the muscle is starting to like tense And even then, she's able to like draw out this thing's tongue almost like a foot and a half, like a little bit longer than its entire body's length. And she kind of like pokes and prods at it and like spreads some of its toes, and you see as she like expands like the toes, and you see that there's like a webbing that extends between each of these feet. Oh, curious and curious. You've done well to slay such a creature early. It is perhaps weeks or a month old. And she might kind of continue the conversation to kind of like figure out as much as she might be able to elucidate that you all already know. And kind of like you'll start to come to conclusions like very different tactic kind of happening. This isn't somebody who's trying to like pry information under the assumption that you're hiding anything, so much as this is somebody who's actively curious about real information. Um, so it'll be a very different questioning than like what you had with the captain.
Yeah, and Davros will be again kind of somewhat awed by like all the the surroundings and kind of finding himself here. He's going to be very open and kind of answering the questions.
Did you do like a guild artisan as Davros's background? Do you have any languages that you speak other than common?
So he can speak Elvish and Dwarvish. I think his reading comprehensions, his reading skills are quite um, uh, low given his low intelligence. But I feel like it's kind of something he
Well, it
would
makes
pick up.
sense though. If you had to actually engrave anything in any important languages, it would likely be in Dwarvish or inside of Elvish languages. So it makes sense for you to understand them, even if you're not like a scholar in those languages.
Yeah, like he could. Yeah, like he can, and probably maybe he like if he's interacted with kind of like tradesmen everywhere, right? They learn the languages they need to conduct their business. Um, like he's not going to go reading a treatise anytime soon, but he kind of he has some understanding of so Elvish and Dwarvish, and then Common.
So I think over like the bits of the conversation, you will hear where she uses like vastly speaking common, as if speaking to you all. She's not somebody who's overly verbose, trying to hide what she's saying inside of language that just isn't meant to be understood. She's um, very kind of clear in what she's talking about. But there will be a few occasions where she does use the word that seems to um, describe this creature, which you would only recognize essentially as some sort of essentially elfish. And it's going to essentially be that you hear her calling this thing a slotty. Um, in the description, she continues to describe toad-like qualities in this thing's progression and starts to recognize more and more that this thing is adolescent enough that she thinks the danger is past. While the two of you are there, you'll hear little bits of her kind of describing it to the captain that he needs to be worried in the guild district, and that the Knights of the Pale will actually keep an eye on the guild district for this reason into the next few weeks of the danger that others have been bit and might be infected by this thing. That depending on if it is old enough, it may be able to pass its disease through its saliva, and that saliva effectively starts to turn people into these things. But you're kind of going to essentially come to a conclusion at some point here that Ninor was bit or something happened. This thing started to grow within Ninor and would one day burst forth and kind of separate itself from Ninor. And I think that's probably what you guys will kind of get out of a visit to the Blade Chapel and to Sister Torella Spock.
Gotcha. So, yeah, when she mentions like the disease and the bite, Davros is definitely going to kind of like, well, it bit me, and it'll kind of like show like his hand and his shoulder, and I think the guard had been bitten once as well. Um, but if it sounds like this thing was young enough that maybe it wasn't able to pass on the disease. Um,
Um, yeah, so when you describe your bite, Sister Torella is going to kind of take a few moments to kind of investigate it. You'll feel that same kind of like silver pointer kind of like poked into the like sore spot of the bite and kind of like feeling around like to see if it's infected and kind of like turn the pus. And she doesn't ask you how you feel about this. Like this is far more matter of a fact. Like she walks behind you and starts doing it. Um and eventually kind of like comes to a conclusion. Um you don't seem to be infected. But and she looks to the captain, it is worth the safekeeping of the city to be wise. Send your guard to whatever chaplain you have caring for your ranks. And as she kind of like is saying this, you feel kind of like a warm sensation across your back, like stemming from that deltoid and like down your spinal cord. As she starts to like actually cast the spell, you can like feel the weave kind of like extending out of her hand and down your shoulder blade. And as she kind of like finishes like saying like, it is worth sending your guard to your chaplain to be cured, for these dangers are beyond the pale the city need entertain. And she just kind of like pats down on like the sore spot as she kind of finishes that. And you go from like this moment where she's like digging around with like a silver utensil inside of a like sore, bloody wound to like no adverse feeling as she kind of like pats into your back.
yeah, so Davros is definitely trying to sort of be maintain a stoic demeanor, but he'll definitely give out a few kind of like winces and grunts as she's poking around. Um, and then as it suddenly kind of like changes, he's gonna try and kind of like almost try to looking on his own shoulder, even though he might, depending on where the bite was, he probably can't really see it, but he's definitely like, and then eventually kind of turn to Sister Torella and kind of thank you.
So the wound is actually still there. Um, Effectively, she just did lesser restoration to remove any worry of the disease that might be within.
Oh,
But the
gotcha.
wound is essentially still there. But the wound, as far as things go, is little more than like, I mean, for a blacksmith, it's it's oddly placed, being that it's on your shoulder. But you know, if this thing has like a 2 to 3 inch wound, that's the kind of thing like you can get in a metal shop doing almost anything carelessly. You can get a gouging wound like that. I don't think that wound would be especially like heinous to a smith.
Yeah, I imagine Davros is, yeah, he's got scars all over the place and kind of like places where like his hair's been singed off on his arms and forearms and stuff. Yeah. Um it was more the thing, more the nature of the creature that bit him more so than like the bite itself that had him worried. Um but yeah, but he will kind of thank he felt could feel she did something. So he's doesn't know much about magical healing, but he's thanking her, and he's kind of also maybe giving a kind of mentally saying a little prayer for Nina, if that's kind of one of these things, kind of it's almost like a parasite inside him, is like it's a terrible way to go, and now he's worried about, well, I sent Dem to go find my uncle. What if the same thing happened to him? And he's kind of like bringing it back to his mind, like I need to find out what's going on here.
So the two of you can essentially return. Um, I think from this perspective, you'll actually see, as when you leave, um, then Simon will actually almost um, like calling out like in a whisper. You see is like this like haze of kind of like darkness, almost like kind of comes forward and almost like manifests in front of him, and he's going to kind of just like mutter a few words that seem to kind of like pass this idea before saying, we'll need a carriage from Emperor's Road back down to the guard's house within the Guildsman district. And you basically see as this like wisp kind of like passes off, and like 15 minutes later, a carriage is going to like show up on Emperor's Road and pull up for you guys. And this is going to be another one of those things where you'll see in high society up here in Old Town, you don't just get a carriage. They use the messenger services that are far more rare to see in the lower districts, and one of them is like this like spirit network of like, it's not like a pigeon network of passing like notes. It's like these spirits are a network of almost like telephones in the city, and he kind of like passes this kind of message on, and eventually you have like essentially your taxi cab kind of arrives, instead of like, you're not going to just see an unspoken for carriage in this area. um but you guys kind of ride that back. There's a certain amount of kind of questions still about like if you knew about what illness Ninor suffered from, little bits of things like that. But on some level, you've figured out one end of what was happening in this kind of like path that's technically you started with Dem weeks ago, but it was effectively what was actually wrong with Ninor was that he had been infected by a slotty. Um, do you have any other thoughts?
Yeah, so I think kind of like to like the captain's questions, like Davros is kind of again getting a little frustrated. Like if I'd known what was going on, I never would have sent my son to that house. But as we're kind of getting back, so now he's worried that, okay, so we know, so if Ninor suffered this thing, if yeah, if Dem somehow had the same thing happen, he could be sick himself, or I mean he has no idea how long like the incubation period is, unless that's something that Sister Trella would have told him. He wouldn't have thought to ask it. Um,
Roll an intelligence for me.
15.
You would pick up like part of what she was discussing was effectively that this thing was an adolescent, that it was, like weeks to a month or so old.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, and he can't. If Dem did speak to Ninor, obviously Ninor's dead. So I think he's at this point going to go back to his other thought was if this thing emerged, if we can figure out where the fire started, if we think maybe this thing caused the initial fire to start, maybe there's something there. Um, but he's otherwise pretty lost. He's kind of in over his head already.
So I'm somewhat tempted to say that maybe the captain actually does share with you the potentials that they might know and understand some of the shadier things that Dem might have been up to. Um, and in parts because part of that also includes the Warrens and essentially like actions beyond his place. Um, so I think maybe perhaps like in part of the actual ride, maybe he'll get questioned. What are you aware of your son's dealings with the? Give me 1 second, my bad. Like wrote it down. It's not in these notes.
The Killraven.
Well, I want to go for something else at first here.
Oh,
Uh,
sure.
what are you aware of your son's dealings with the Crooked Skinner and their patron Klimtas Erling?
I think rather blank kind of look is going to come over Davros. I, I know Demp liked to drink, liked to gamble, got into trouble from time to time, but I never heard of this Skinner or this Kellentoss fellow.
Was he a regular within the Warrens?
As far as I know, he tended to stick closer to home, but be honest, I don't know half of what he got up to. More than half, probably. But I can't imagine he'd be going in there on the regular.
And his connection to the Kill Ravens? Are you aware what he did for them?
It's the first I'm hearing of it. And he'll kind of like shake his head and like kind of mutter to himself, like, "Damn, what'd you get yourself into?" But you never told me anything about it. wouldn't be surprised if it was that Briff fella got mixed up with all that. Never did like that one.
Riff. And he'll take a moment. Grifford. And he kind of like tries to lead you into saying his last name. Do you actually have the last name for Briff?
Can't remember if we actually came up with one.
I've got one written down for him, but I don't know if you ever actually had it. Do you think there is a reason for Davros to know?
I think it's probably like even if Dem mentioned it at some point, he wouldn't. He would just, he wouldn't care. It's just, I knew him as Briff, as kind of the ne'er do well friend of Dem. He might like try to like kind of like say a couple names that maybe um no idea if they'd be like anywhere even close, but it's like I don't know. I just knew him as Briff.
He's another that we had understandings that they were working with the Crime League, the Kill Ravens, and him and his son, or him and your son, apparently were two of the last who were in the house of your friend, Ninor.
I just can't. I mean, Dem's at his troubles, but I just can't see him getting into anything that shady. But
So I think in kind of this process, it kind of makes sense that like as if you guys like took this long carriage ride back down from the old town, and at this point sharing some of this, both like about the Kill Ravens as well as um, Crooked Skinner and Kalimtas Erling, you're now like starting to walk through the home of Ninor. In a very similar kind of effort of he's sharing information, looking for how you're responding to the different like shock value of things. And you're like walking through this house that like is decimated. There's blood pretty much everywhere in like almost every room, but you can see vastly the bedroom is just like an explosion of body parts. There's not really anything physically left of the person who was Ninor. This person, on some level, effectively exploded into blood, guts, and bile. Most of their bones are unidentifiable if you can actually spot where bones are. Um, it's a pretty horrific scene that whatever is left is effectively like hanging from the ceilings and the walls, as it just had that little bit of kind of like stickiness to it as the blood was drying. The other rooms in the house, you can see signs of like blood on the walls and on the floor, but it like doesn't make sense. Um, Having fought the Slotty, you might come to recognize that this thing, like the corpse, filled up like a sack of air as it consumed his insides. And then when the pressure inside was too much, it like just burst like a balloon.
Yeah, so I think Davros again, like he is trying to keep a stoic face, but I think he's going to have a very difficult time. Actually, I mean, he's never seen anything close to this sort of level of um, just like horrific stuff. So I think he'd be probably probably likely to at some point just kind of just throw up, start retching, almost like kind of like seeing like an autopsy being done for the first time, or just come on like yeah, just something horrific. I think he'd be basically kind of he's never seen anything like this.
Yeah, I think overall you would have like effectively the proper reaction, that there's no like continued suspicion towards you or anything. There's nothing that's going to kind of continue on from like Captain Simon's perspective here. But again, this is kind of like the setting of him sharing a little bit more information about what they wonder, because there is still a certain level of they wonder how involved Dem and Briff are, but you can also kind of recognize like they're not necessarily looking for Dem and Briff as the people who did this, so much as they're now worried like if Dem and Briff are carrying one of these things themselves.
Yeah, and that would be kind of a similar worry that Davros would be having.
Yeah, and I feel like that's again kind of where like he's finding you have the right reaction to a lot of these things in recognizing that you're probably following a similar thing. Um, I think overall, um, you guys might have another kind of meeting with, say, like a fire chief about where they could place the fire, and they basically start the fire at one of these houses, like almost like 2 blocks behind Ninor's. Um, Somebody who was kind of same idea that I was presenting there, where the same idea is somebody was, like starting the fire in their stove to make breakfast, and was surprised by this cat that like leapt through their room, and by the time they were like gathering themselves up from the floor, their their blinds were on fire and they were getting out of the house. And there's like 3 or 4 people in kind of the same little like line about a block or two behind Ninor's place that say very similar things. All of them doing almost the exact same thing, kind of causing a fire. There's like 10 people who report this thing like ran through their house at like 10 a.m. 3 of them caused those fires, and then you've got like 2 more people who at like not 10:30 saw it here. But yeah, you guys can kind of track like there is kind of a path of this thing running out of the house when the cops kind of went to shut it down, and it basically like slowly caused the fire as it was running kind of like southwest away from that.
Yeah, so I think yeah, so Davros will want to kind of maybe like take a look inside the where they think kind of the this creature was first spotted. Um, Probably nothing left after the fire, but essentially go like sifting through to see if like maybe some of the ashes or if something hadn't completely burned. Basically, essentially looking for any evidence that um, maybe Dem had been here. Um,
Gotcha. I think going around with the captain, you guys have access to like those 10 people who were among the first reports. Roll a D100. If you get a 10 or a lower, maybe we can have one of the people's homes is still intact.
nope,
Yeah.
60.
I think going through and like actually talking to the 10 different people, none of them saw any people. They all try to describe like a cat maybe on some level you have like the social intuition to recognize like these people want to call it a cat because that's easier on their mind than necessarily recognizing that it was something that doesn't belong at all. But effectively, yeah, like those 10 houses were all some of the original points of the fire, and they've all been consumed in the actual blaze that day. Um, but I would say, like eyewitness wise discussing, you can probably confirm that this, at this point, doesn't really give you anything closure wise in what happened to Dem.
Yeah, so it's kind of Davros thinks this is kind of a dead end here, and he's looking to the guards and the captain. Uh, well, I'm still intending to find out. I still need to find them, and you say he had dealings with the Kill Ravens. Perhaps they're the ones I need to speak to. And kind of as he says "speak to," he's kind of like gripping, kind of his hand will kind of clench on the kind of the handle of the maul that he's kind of carrying, or probably more on his maybe just like balled into fists kind of thing. If the maul's kind of probably like slung over his back.
I can't suggest that you do anything further. I believe it is in your best interest to let these things rest from what I can offer you. Commissioner's men neither confirm nor would I deny that Killraven exists or that they exist within the city. In the same way, I cannot suggest that you go into the wardens and search for the Crooked Skinner, nor can I suggest you look for Kalimtas. These are all things beyond the scope of the Commissar's men and our proclamation within the city. To approach either would mere require a declaration of war from the Commissar, both in regards to the wardens as well as any criminals of the nature that it would appear the Killraven Crime League is.
And Davros will kind of like turn and just kind of like spit on the ground and oh, good thing I'm no guard then. But I just as a matter of courtesy, I'm telling you, I don't intend to leave this be. Someone knows something that happened. I'm going to find out.
Our business is keeping the streets safe. If something comes before me within the Guildsman's district, and you do not make things too flagrant, nor too violent, I believe I can protect you from anything that might come about as far as the legal necessities. But anything you can solve away from the streets would be better anyways. But otherwise, I thank you for your honesty, and most of all, I appreciate that when you didn't need to, you were still quite honorable. You and I should have named the guard a while ago, but let's call him Guard Kieran. You and Kieran were quite well to dispose of this creature, and it's good to know that it was theoretically safe and an end to its terror.
Davros will kind of, give a nod and, well, I'm just uh, glad I could help with that thing. Don't want to think of what other trouble it might have gotten up to if we hadn't stopped it. I appreciate your point. I'll try to keep it in mind, and I'll be as discreet as I can. Kind of maybe with a little wry, kind of like just twerking his mouth at the idea of discreet, like he is not a subtle man, Davros. But I suppose for now we part in ways then.
Yeah, he'll basically kind of shake hands with you, a little curt bow, and essentially like walk off. Um, maybe at this point you guys are like leaving the fires, and he's heading down like Lunas Road towards the guardhouse there on Constable Way.
And did the I think did I sorry I can't remember. Did Davros get a location for Kelantas?
The Crooked Skinner is essentially the name of the tavern.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. Yeah. So I think that yeah, Davros will be kind of after taking his leave from the captain. Um, what yeah, what time of day is it? Because he is thinking you know he knows the Warrens enough that maybe well he doesn't really know the Warrens, so he's thinking maybe it would be best not to go in at night. But if it's still kind of enough, you know, remaining daylight, he would probably plan to then head over immediately and see if he can find this Crooked Skinner Tavern.
So you're kind of in um, effectively what might be the most dangerous time for you to decide is because you're like late afternoon, early evening. So you're looking at somewhere between, say, like 3 and 5 o'clock ish here.
Gotcha. Well, I think he's going to. Yeah, he wishes it was maybe a little bit earlier, but it's not actually nighttime yet, and there's some urgency. So I think he is going to risk it and plan to head into the Warrens. Okay, I'm back.
Excellent. So, um, Davros has plenty of reasons to recognize the danger of going into the Warrens, just as much as you have plenty of reason to know the non-linear nature of its construction, effectively that it is just hovels. So there's not really going to be roads, there's not really alleyways, it's just wherever people build things. So as you start to head into the Warrens, what sort of initial thoughts do you have on what are you going to use to navigate? What are you thinking is going to get you towards the Crooked Skinner and or Kalintas Airling?
Sorry, just do a little inventory management. Yeah, so I think kind of knowing the danger, I think he's going to actually. Davros is basically trying to just he's trying to look intimidating so that he doesn't want to get like ganged up on. So he's probably got his maul kind of. He's carrying it. Yeah, but I think he is. I think he's basically just going to try to um, find somebody and try to basically uh, essentially demand they tell him like where can I find the crooked Skinner. If it looks like there's like any like a group like a any like a group congregating, you might um, head uh, for that to maybe have a better chance.
So moving kind of just like into the area from the old sea road, if you're, let's see, probably coming from like the southern end and you're near where like vaguely that like 320 is. As you like kind of just like fall into the like kind of darkness and the shabby nature of the Warrens, you like kind of step off of the main road, and very quickly like the hustle and bustle of the city moving past the Warrens is gone and things get a little bit quieter. You might spot that there are like the occasional person who seems to be like moving on higher levels where they're like walking on top of like the first or second story of some of these hovels. There are the occasional person who's just kind of like sat down on the ground, and they seem to just be almost like a crazy person going through their like things as if their like bag of trash was anything other than garbage. Um, it probably wouldn't be likely that you see people in particular congregating. But if you wanted to look for it, you could like do a roll to actually like search for a group that seems to be a group.
uh, yeah, I guess that would be kind of that would be his thought process there. So I think he would try and see if he can
Um,
find one.
yeah, so let me just get like an investigation from you as you're like walking through, and there's like the occasional person who like seems to be like effectively homeless, but you're looking for something a little bit more.
Yeah, and that is a 0.
All right, so as you're kind of like walking, you kind of like look around and you're trying to pay attention to someone, to anybody who seems to be like the type of person who you're gonna get like that you might be able to get some information from. Let me actually have you roll a d8 for me. And while you're walking, you're going to start to hear footsteps to where you start to wonder if somebody's actually following you. And you're going to find after a few moments like you kind of like step through this little alleyway, and you're trying to like see if this person is following you before you kind of notice like not only have you gotten yourself lost, but you're also pretty sure that you were being followed, but that the person has vanished. What do you presently have on your person?
Let's see. So he's got the maul. Um, he's got a dagger, water skin. I feel like his smith's tools probably would have left. Um, well, no, I guess no. He would be carrying those with him. and then he's got he does have a pack with some food, a couple of torches, a tinderbox, mess kit. Um,
Any coin on you at present?
yeah, he probably. I don't think he would have brought all of it. Um,
Yeah, I mean, technically you have a house, so it's perfectly acceptable for you to not have all of your coin, but what do you have on you for the day, kind of thing?
yeah, so I would say he lives a pretty modest lifestyle. And I was actually kind of thinking like, so the coin that he kind of has like as his starting equipment coin is probably might have actually been like some of the coin that he had found that Dem had stashed away. Um, so I feel like he would be carrying something like maybe like 2 golds worth of coin um, in silver and copper. So maybe like about 12 like 12 silver and like 80 copper kind of thing.
How many torches do you have on you?
He just brought 2 with him. The others were left at home.
Gotcha. So let's see. You'll notice like 4 silver pieces and one of your torches are missing.
Gotcha. Yeah, so he'll kind of be like spinning around and looking, and
You just kind of come to the conclusion like at some point somebody was following you and you kind of like caught on to it. But part of what ended up like playing out was that you kind of dodging through some of these little side alleyways almost like sent yourself into their territory where all of a sudden you're kind of like twisted up and kind of looking around. Now there's a slit in your backpack and a couple of your coins have already been kind of like taken, and you can think of like a few moments where like you walked past like this person who's like piled over in rags and they're like trying to like sleep in the alleyway, or like this person who you like kind of like bumped into as you like stepped up to the alleyway. There's a few people who came in contact with you, but it's just one of those things where like it was just it's kind of a quick few moments inside of this little like dark alleyway where everything's like close and touched up that you just start to notice like, all right, pickpocket got me at some point. They were doing something.
gotcha. Yeah, so and Davros will be kind of frustrated, and he's almost like he's just gonna at this point wants to maybe try and get into a maybe out of the like kind of the narrowest alleys, but at this point he's almost just like the next person he sees, he's just gonna kind of grab and be like, where's the crooked Skinner? Whether that's like one of the kind of like the bums, or essentially the first person he can essentially like reach.
Oh shit, I accidentally closed down. Um, yeah, I'm not actually in. Oh no, okay, I see what I did. I had a whole separate thing up. Yeah, let me get a, uh, let's go for another strength-based persuasion here. Oh, I think there's an ambulance outside of my house. Um, let's go with strength-based persuasion as you kind of just like grab up the next person you see who's like kind of piled underneath their rags.
Let's see. So that would be a 10 then. Um, yeah, because I got a +0 persuasion, but then +3 strength.
You kind of like startle this like old person who you kind of like pick up out of the rags, and get get like kind of quicken up in their face, as you're like kind of angered to notice like you've already been kind of taken in this place, and you just sort of like shake them. The person kind of like startles a little bit. You see they've got like pit marks and kind of like scars across their face, certainly kind of like gaunt. They absolutely like reek, and just kind of like looking around with their eyes like darting as they immediately kind of like constrict more and more. This person's not like really like even open their eyes during the daytime for quite some time, and just in kind of like a startle, it's it's not even like setting in what your words are meaning, and they're just going to point you off in a direction, um very quickly kind of recognizing like this person didn't necessarily like help you in the least bit. They just point like kind of like off north and east of you.
Yeah, so Davros will kind of release the person and kind of just like shake his head like a little bit in disgust, and then he's also thinking, as kind of little pang of like conscience kind of comes over him, and he um, I think he's going to reach into his purse and maybe just kind of like drop a couple of coppers, um, kind of on the ground, and then I mean, essentially at this point he doesn't know where he's going, so he might as well go off in the direction that the person pointed to. Um,
Gotcha. So as you kind of like drop those coppers, you see as that person like scrambles for them, and somebody else like scrambles from a few feet away and kind of like makes a rush for those same coins, but just like a little bit too late to grab them up. They kind of like grovel at your feet, and they kind of look to you and they're like, "Coppers? Where, where, what, where do you need to find? I can help you for some pennies. Pennies? Can I would like to pennies. Can I earn some pennies?"
Davros is gonna look down and, "You can take me to the Crooked Skinner. There's coin in it for you. Maybe a meal as well."
Cricket Skinner. Yes, I know this well. I'll take you a meal, food, a drink to the Cricket Skinner. Yes, please, please follow me, follow me. This person like walks kind of like almost hands and knee or hands and feet, like they're almost walking like a quadruped. Um, they quickly kind of go from this like almost like groveling at your feet where they're like constantly like pawing at your leg to like walking away off in pretty much that similar direction.
Yeah. So
And
sorry. Go ahead.
so as you kind of like pass off, relatively going north here for a while, as you're kind of like there's I think the best way to recognize the Warrens is while they've got streets kind of put on this as a map, I think the Warrens is much better to recognize as just like a conglomeration of homes. There are not actually streets in this place because there's no view where you could ever make out a street. Um, if you could take a cross section to only show the lowest level of it, sure, you might be able to recognize streets. But if you took like a cross section of the second level above that, it's not going to set in on the same way as the other one. It's very much a place where, like, if this were a three-layer cake, the first layer does not sit below the second, and the second layer does not sit below the third. They're just layers. So you've got this person who, like, there's times where they're walking along the actual ground, and you've got like, maybe an alleyway that's like 3 or 4 feet wide. Sometimes you're going through like a side alley, and sometimes you're actually like climbing like up and over levels to like avoid walking essentially like through somebody's home because their home in the center of what you previously thought was an alleyway. This is the construction very much outruled any sort of like method that was behind it. But after a few moments of kind of like leading you, the person kind of like turns around on their hands and feet and like in a full kind of like squatted position. Uh, 2 drinks, 2 drinks and a meal, Crooked Skinner. I take you to the Crooked Skinner, 2 drinks and a meal.
Yes, yes, fine. Get on with it.
Yes, fine. Yes, yes, fine. 2 drinks and a meal. Crooked Skinner. And they keep kind of like walking through, and you're kind of like following them through this little area here. And there's different points where, like, all of a sudden they like stop and they like hold out their hand to you and like turn to you and like hold up a finger to be quiet and just go, shh. What kind of thought crosses your mind as they kind of like do this?
So Davros's eyes are going to kind of narrow, but he will essentially try to stop moving. Maybe kind of just like looking around, but definitely out of his element here. But he will try to essentially be quiet.
Gotcha. So a few moments like go by, and then you're going to start to hear like from a little bit ahead of you and to the right, like some sort of like shrieking. Um, and some of this sounds relatively humanoid. Some of it does not sound humanoid at all. And it's really hard to put one sound from the next, but something horrific is happening nearby. And the moment those sounds kind of break out, this person starts to move again, like forward and to the left, and they're ushering you like away from this noise.
So Davros and wait, wait. Um,
Crooked Skinner, 2 drinks and a meal. Come, come. And there's still like horrific, like screeches and screams of pain.
yeah, I think Davros is a he wants to reach the Crooked Skinner, but he's also he can't just ignore the screaming, and he's like,
Gotcha. So if you like look to like the south where he starts to move to the north, roll a perception for me here.
all right. Looks like that'll be a 4.
Your perception is a 4. So as you kind of look, there's like a pile of rags sitting next to the ground, and you're probably about 15 or 20 feet away from this. And like that is the focus of where these screams are coming from. It might be somebody's like underneath those rags having a nightmare. It might be somebody's like underneath those rags, like stabbing somebody else. But there's still, again, something is essentially kind of like animalistic just as much as like horrific about what you're hearing, like humanoid and animalistic.
Yeah, so I think Davros is going to start approaching, but he's going to call out. It's like, hey, what's going on here? Um, kind of
So as
gripping
soon
him.
as you call out, like making like an actual human kind of sound, you're going to hear like the shrieks are going to turn into like pleas for help. Um, there's still other kind of like horrific kind of like shrieking happening. But like the screams of pain very quickly become help me. and you're going to still kind of hear almost like kind of chewing sounds. But if you like pull the rags away, you're going to see that there are like three rats attacking a human.
Yeah, he would kind of, as he once he hears the pleas, kind of like, yeah, he would just rush forward and try to like pull the, yeah, essentially pull away the rags to see what's going on.
Yeah, so this is effectively somebody who's like so like emaciated that they can't actually fight off rats that are chewing on them. Um, but if you take the time to kind of like swing at them, let me just get your like initial attack.
Yep, he will go to yeah, he doesn't want to hit the person, but he's got his, yeah, he's got them all out, so he'll essentially try to, yeah, swing and kind of knock one of them off. 11.
Gotcha. So that's yeah, that's enough that you are able to kind of like swing into like a rat, kind of going towards this person's face and very quickly just like smacking it off of them. It like pings against the wall and the creature's gonna just like kind of like stop moving. This it's like a pretty massive rat, but it's otherwise a very typical rat. It's not like anything that's like inorderly or supernatural. It is again simply like this is part of what the Warrens is people who are so horrific in their place in their lot in life that they're basically sleeping in positions where occasionally they are fed on by rats. But you kind of like smack that one aside. You like see as this person's face is like already kind of like scarred up. One of the rats kind of has like a like portion of their body where it's like cut open around their stomach, and the rat's like inside of their stomach cavity, like pulling flesh out through this hole, and it's like chewing as it almost like looks out at you as it sees you bat this other one away before it like reaches in again, tears at a chunk of flesh, and it's trying to like scurry to the side. But there's still two more rats here. Another swing from you.
I think at this point, given the rats are so close, he's going to um, drop the maul and pull out his dagger to try to essentially stab it. Again, just because I feel like the maul is kind of he doesn't want to smack into the woman or
Gotcha.
person. Okay, so it'll be a 21.
Solid strike, and you can basically stab into that other rat. I see no reason why. I think it's just kind of like an unwritten thing that if you have essentially one of your hands kind of bare-fisted, that you can like make your secondary attack um, with it as a bonus action. So if you'd like, you could just throw a punch and potentially like punch and or grapple the last rat.
Yeah, almost thinking like trying to like grab it by the tail and smash it against like the wall or something like that. But yeah, basically an unarmed strike. That should be a 21.
Yeah, so I'd say like with those like two last attempts, like you're able to like stab towards the one that's like feeding on their actual like stomach cavity and kind of like throw that rat away as you like impale it with your dagger. And as you kind of like catch the last one kind of like scurrying through their clothes, you're almost able to like grab into the part of the clothing that's like moving unnaturally, and you kind of hear like the squeal of the rat, and with just like a little bit of an effort kind of like pulling it out of, like imagine like super baggy clothing, and you're just kind of like pulling it out of like one of these like flaps of clothes, and just yeah, like you said, like just kind of smacking it against the wall as you like use the rat as leverage against itself.
Yeah, so as he um, kind of smashes the last of the rats that he can see, he's looking towards this person and are you all right?
um
Maybe
Roll
try
a
to
medicine check for me.
Yeah, I was gonna say like maybe like trying to see just how bad that wound is in the stomach. So that will be a 15.
So I think as you kind of like ask them if they're all right, you can see this person is like kind of like shaking in shock as is. They are still almost like pawing at their body and like trying to like they're almost like sliding their hands like in long strokes along their flesh, trying to like swipe, like bugs off of them, like if there were rats still crawling over them. Um, the person's not actually like fully recognizing that you like alleviated the problem. They're still kind of in that like shock state of like being attacked, and they're still squirming. They kind of like look at you as their movements do start to slow, as they do kind of like almost steady their breath, but they're still kind of like lost in this like moment of like the rats kind of like being around them, and they just kind of like or maybe a few words together where they're like the rats chewing, always gnawing, clawing, chewing, rats, help, rats. And like this person is like in like a stupor. Um in the long runs, like I don't mean for this to fully distract you as Davros, but like this is kind of what the Warrens are. Is it's like to see like the worst of society. It's the people who society forgets.
Yeah, so he's like they're they're gone. He's not a he's trying to essentially trying to be comforting, but he's that's not really his thing. So he's trying to be almost like matter of fact. They're gone. Look, they're dead. And he's kind of like almost like pointing to the smashed and stabbed rats. And like part of him starting to think like, okay, I need to help this person, but then he's like, it's kind of, I took care of these, but I can't. Yeah, almost just thinking like there's really nothing I can do. So he would try to get this person to calm down for maybe for like like 30 seconds, a minute. Um, but then kind of kind of like shaking his head, kind of like almost like wishing there was more that he could do, but he's afraid that the other person may not be sticking around, so he wants to go back and make sure that they can actually still hopefully guide him to the tavern.
Yeah. So when you like look back for the person who's supposed to be guiding you, you kind of still see this person as almost like squatted over. Like they're just when they stop moving, they just look kind of like another pile of rags and trash, like in the corner in any given one of these alleys. It starts to make you probably really wonder like how often are you looking down an alley in this place and there's 20 or 30 people who are within sight, but you can't make them out as anything different than the trash that's in the way, just as much as the humans that are standing there. And that's kind of another kind of thing to take away, like with how the impression of the Warrens would come off, is it blends or it blurs that line between kind of like living an object, um, in the sense of like what these humanoids are. Um, but you do kind of like turn around, spot the person, and after a moment, their hand kind of like flicks again, and you see like this kind of subtle like hand gesture, like just kind of like showing you those little circles, like to basically start them again.
Yep, and Davros will kind of head back towards them and kind of maybe like trying to like get some of the rat guts off of the head of his maul. Excuse me. And all right, lead on. So much farther.
So while you're like cleaning off the rat guts, They're gonna kind of like look towards you. The, the rats, the rats, your tails, save your tails. Tails are money, money. Save them, save your coin. It kind of like points basically to you that like taking those tails is gold. If you leave them behind, you're like leaving coin behind. Rats eat us. We eat the rats. You save the person, but they can eat the rats. They can eat tonight. You will feed me 2 drinks. 2 drinks in a meal. 2 drinks in a meal. 2 drinks in a meal.
Mixing a meal. But Davros, as he kind of tells him about the rat tails, yeah, Davros will kind of he's going to head back to yeah, essentially try and I guess like saw them off. Um, I think he's also going to, as he's doing that, um, drop a few more or try or hand like a handful of coppers to the person being attacked by the rats. Just, almost like apologetically, like almost I wish there was more I could do, but he'll kind of hand her like 5 coppers. Um, but otherwise, yeah, try to gather up the rat tails before returning um, to his guide.
Gotcha. So leads you through like a few more little alleyways, like up and around a few of these other obstacles until you eventually kind of come to what seems like a little bit wider of an alley where there's almost like 5 feet. Two people could almost walk shoulder to shoulder, moving through this little section. And you see as they kind of like point out a nicer location that doesn't really fit into like the rest of the Warrens in that this place actually has like actual constructed walls. Now around it and on top of it, there are still ramshackle places built. But as you come into like a better view of this place, you see that like this is like an actual kind of constructed building on this like edge of what seems like maybe it's an actual like constructed road. And kind of take a few moments as you get closer, you start to actually hear like music in the air. Um, and after a few moments, the person basically is so excited, like leaving you forward, that they're like already kind of like moving forward to open the door. There's no actual signage around this place, other than basically seeing that there are like wooden signs kind of hanging up on the like uh above the actual doors, like inside, that simply show like an animal skin, um, and it's kind of like stretched out. It's just not in, say, like a proper square so much as like it's just like a roughly drawn like animal skin, and the name might be Crooked Skinner because there's the animal skin on it, and the drawing is crooked.
Gotcha. Yeah, so he will. Davros will. This is the place then, and he'll go to essentially move inside as well.
So stepping inside of the actual place, there'll be a few different kind of levels in the actual um, like general area. I like this general bar here. This doesn't necessarily have to be like exactly what you see, but essentially think of the idea that there's a couple of ramshackle tables that are just as much like just flat doors on top of empty kegs as they are like people sitting on mini kegs, as there are chairs. So everything is very much just like throw it together to make something work. But you kind of, yeah, like you'll walk in kind of at like the main door, You've got a couple of tables along the northern wall and a couple of tables that are like out through the center. And then a few locations where you can kind of sit like around the bar where there's a barkeep who's actually kind of like, um, you know, bar keeping. Um, and then maybe one of the back rooms is kind of like a pseudo room where you can see like there's a stairway that leads up in, let's say, like the northwestern side or the northeastern side. There's like a stair that leads up to a second level, and you can see like on the second level there are a few people who are kind of like sitting up, like overlooking. But overall, there's probably say like 10 or 15 people inside of this place. Everybody is still in kind of a shabby state of affairs. But overall, like the difference of being inside here and outside in the state of the Warrens, um, you can kind of tell these are at least people who are doing a little bit better in their like kind of station, just kind of walking through these doors. But let's say if you had kind of like a card game going down um over here between like three people. You've got a couple of people who are kind of drinking over here. I think maybe something like that. It's probably like somewhat satisfying of like what is technically kind of in this place at this point here. But those are kind of like the vague like people who are in this place at present. And then say you can probably spot like one or two people upstairs um, above.
Yeah, so I think Davros, as he steps in, says he still had his kind of maul in one hand, and he's going to use it to kind of gesture towards the bar before. Imagine he'd be kind of carrying it on his back, so he'd go to sheath it, for lack of a better word, um, and kind of start moving. He's going to start moving like just straight for the for where he sees the bartender. Um, kind of like looking around, just like he doesn't expect to actually see Dem in here, but he kind of scanning the crowds, but otherwise moving for the bar.
Gotcha. Let me get a perception from you.
Flat 10.
While you take like the moment to actually scan the bar, you do spot that pretty much everyone here actually is brandishing some weapon of some sort. Like the person you've used as a guide here effectively does not have like any weapon on them. And that's one of the things that is actually going to kind of like set them apart as somebody who like almost like very quickly you're just going to notice like, you know, one person with a short sword. There's quite a few people who have like axes or hatchets on them. A few people who have like a maul or something that's a little bit larger of a bludgeoning weapon, but you pretty much key onto these are people who are carrying something for their defense, and that kind of like will stick out pretty quickly as you like step through this place. But otherwise you guys kind of like hop up to the bar, like move into the bar. You don't seem to draw too much attention on your way there. But by the time you like sit down, you very quickly hear like your guide is right back to 2 drinks and a meal, 2 drinks and a meal. Crooked Skinner. We're at the Crooked Skinner.
Indeed, we are kind of looking around and kind of catching the sights of the weapons, and he'll I'm a man of my word, um, and kind of he's looking to the barkeep. Um, you heard him. 2 drinks and a meal. Uh, Make it 3 drinks. I'll take one myself.
So she'll like kind of turn around, grab a couple of lagers or a couple of glasses, um, a couple of pints rather, and just like pour like a lager, like, scrape off the head of it, and kind of set him in front. Um, for a moment, she's not like thinking to prepare like the second drink before basically noticing that like your guide just like straight turns the drink up and is just chugging. They're not like good. It's not an especially good beer, but they're not taking any time to taste this. They are chugging like right through that beer. And very quickly she like immediately like just kind of like pauses, waits for him to set down the glass, refills it, scrapes the head off the top again, sets it back in front of him, and that time he starts to act a little bit more like that he understands how to be in a pub, and he's like drinking it, but he's like constantly kind of drinking, looking around. Um, but she'll kind of like look to the two of you and say, well, welcome to the Crooked Skinner. I'm Maybell, barkeep here. How can I help you besides the meal and the drinks?
So yeah, so Davros kind of like as he got his beer, he almost like was like turning to almost do like a little kind of like cheer sort of gesture, but he sees the his guide is just like chugging it, and he'll kind of just like shake his head. He'll take a kind of a more normal sip of his own, maybe um, grimace a little. Imagine it's not yeah, like he said, it's not the best beer in the world, but he's not used to anything real fancy himself. Um, and he'll look to Maybell, um, kind of like put his hand on the on the counter in front of him and looking for Kellamtas. Heard he could be found here.
So she kind of just like smirks a little bit. Well, you've come to the right place. This is his establishment. And what sort of business do you have for the sir?
I'm looking for my son, Dalton. Uh, I've come to understand he might have had a acquaintance with Kellamtas, so I'd like to ask him a few questions.
Dem's been through here often enough. I can see the similarity in your face. I almost called you by his name when you entered. But I don't believe it would be a problem at all for you to see the Lintas. And she kind of like points towards him. Are you together or?
No, but he did me the courtesy of helping me to find this place. Give him what he wants: food, drink. I'll uh, I'll cover it. Um,
Of course. Well, if you follow me, and she'll basically like walk you through again. Like I got the idea this is almost like a shadow, like door slash room back here, where like it doesn't necessarily have a roof so much as you walk through the door into like employee only section, and then like you take the stairs up to the second level, or maybe I said it was over here, but regardless, you basically walk through that back door, and then she'll take you up, and you'll like walk up to this like second floor here. And then she'll take a moment here, and she kind of like looks towards the two men here, and she basically like looks to the one on, let's go with like the west side of the screen, and she kind of says, Kalimtas, this is the father of Davros, and he was hoping to speak with you. I'll leave you all to it. And you'll see, just as the other person is just going to follow her basically back downstairs. But Kalimtas will kind of like stand as those two like make their exit, and he'll just reach out his hand to you and like, hello, welcome to my establishment. I'm Kalimtas. How may I help you, sir?
So Davros will kind of reach out his own hand to shake, a very single gruff, kind of strong shake. Well, uh, as you heard, I'm here looking for news of my son. Haven't seen him in some time, and I'm grown worried. I heard you and he had knew each other, so I'm here hoping that you've seen him recently, might know what he's been getting himself up to.
Well, of sorts of late, we've been perhaps closer to friends and business partners. I believe among the most recent things was actually the request for him to help out a friend of mine who had gone ill. Although it has been quite some time, Tim does have a habit of disappearing for his own will.
And Davros give kind of a snort of agreement at that, and your friend, you're speaking of Ninor.
Maybe a little bit more surprise on his face as you use that name. I am indeed, and you're aware of him. How?
He and I know each other, but bad news on that front. And uh, he's not going to go into details about like all the horrid stuff that he saw at the house, but he'll say,
Kind of share the like cliff notes.
yeah, like Ninor's dead, killed in her home.
So with the initial news there, he's going to have like a kind of like a quick moment where he actually like stands up and looks over the bar. And have he's gonna say something to the effect of like, Maybell, stand up. And let's see. I've already named some of the sidekicks for the Twin Star Marauders. I don't have them on hand. Let's go for send up Erwin and Mukta. I need some assistance. And you'll see as she kind of like walks around the bar before he like turns back around and sits back to you.
So Davros is he'll take a seat as well. But yeah, otherwise, I guess just kind of like waiting, maybe a little curious about why he's bringing these two up. But yeah, kind of just for now, just kind of waiting.
So I think let's see. I think he's going to gather the two of them, and basically, as they come in, he's going to essentially have kind of the thought passed on. Uh, Dem has been away for some time. He was charged with looking in on Ninor, and they'll kind of like give the address off of the old sea road. And apparently things have gone horribly wrong. If you can head out at present and find what you may, please return as soon as you have anything to share. And I think that's basically will kind of like sit with the idea like with you've got enough news that he's gonna send out like kind of two scouts to immediately go and try to find more information.
So Davros is going to looking towards the two, and then towards Kalimtas. Appreciate it. I've been looking myself today. To, so far, no. Well, other than discovering the poor Ninor's fate.
So I don't remember. Did you ever share any of the connection to the haunted house with anybody from the Twin Star Marauders or Kalimtas? Or was that always kind of in that same moment of Dem heard from Ninor and went off that way? And then they kind of like you tracked like you like were heading back to somewhere and lost track of the woman that you had saved and went backward, right?
Yeah, so he had never actually. Yeah, he that all kind of happened within the same night, so he never would have told anybody. Like the only people who would know that he had gone in there would be maybe like the kids that he interacted with, and I don't know anybody else around who might have seen him and Briff going in. But otherwise, he did not inform anybody where he was going.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. So I think you'll basically find like Kalimtas is pretty forthcoming. He's not necessarily trying to hide anything. Um, it is one of those things where he's not going to hesitate to try to recruit you in the same way that he essentially tried to recruit Dem. One of the things that is going to kind of come up is your son was quite fortunate to have found a valuable entrance into the Bane Warrens on one of the properties I procured. And while it very quickly became my property, I didn't want to make it problematic for him to be able to explore and profit off of what he was able to locate. Um, is there anything that you had on Dem that you do not think that he had on himself when he was captured? Because I would say this is where Kalimtas has access to that stuff and could return it to your father.
Yeah, I think basically all the magic items and things Dem had on him. Um, it's like the earpiece and the spell scroll. Um, yeah, aside from some gold that he would have kept stashed, and maybe some like mundane like equipment at his house, or I guess once he kind of knew once he was here, he probably would have kept it here. But well, maybe not the coin, but yeah, in terms of like magic items and kind of anything more valuable, I think that was all on Dem's person. So just gonna pulling up Dem's inventory real quick.
That's fine. It's not terribly surprising. Um,
Yeah, I don't think anything. Again, aside from coin, some of his coin, which basically Davros has already found, and that's kind of why he wouldn't normally have 15 gold. So essentially, I'm thinking like he took some of that. He found Dem's stash. But yeah, nothing of note that Dem had found that he wouldn't have had on him when he got captured.
my solemn apologies that your son has gone missing. He had been assisting us in our own actions to perhaps bring a little bit more life and rule of law to the Warrens here, and perhaps more to Tollus in general. He is among those who stood for the good that we hope to stand for. I hope we can find a good resolution to the reason he has gone missing. I'm most sorry to find out that my and your friend Ninor has passed in such a way. But I do not think that means that we must give in to fear that the same has happened to your son. I think Dem was more than capable of taking care of himself. And though I sense you are not a big fan, Grifford and him were quite close together, and a loyal friend is a powerful thing. There, too, might do great things.
So yeah, so Davros is he'll kind of won't be able to hide kind of maybe a little bit of his surprise when Kelimtas starts talking about kind of the good that Dem was doing. Um, but he will kind of finally like nod and well, if he was well, if what you say is true, then well, I'm glad to hear it. I'm certainly hoping he's he's okay. And again, I appreciate your sending your two fellows out to see what they can find. You understand, my first priority has to be doing what I can to find him, but uh, seems I owe you for your help, and if you're indeed doing these good things, then perhaps I can be of service.
I understand it is not always a father's way to recognize the choices your son might have made. But I think you should understand that all of us here, rogues and criminals though we might be, we've made choices to put others, the well-being of the people of Tollus, above ourselves. Your son is included among those who gave their flesh for the good of those who would suffer. And all of us, I think would be happy to know when we move on from here that good had a reason. I don't doubt that when we find out more information of what your son has been up to, we will find good is the reason behind it. But we too will not rest while it is unknown to us. You are welcome to stay with us. But when you pledge to help us, know that we hope when that day comes that you recognize you're giving more than what you are to become something more than what we are.
I well, I can't honestly say I ever thought of myself as getting into that this sort of work, but well, from what little I've seen of the Warrens, and well, the gods know this place could use some cleaning up. You have my mall at your service.
Let me get a history check from you here.
That is a 0.
Well, no need for me to look up the names when there's no way that you're going to recognize them. I think one of the things to kind of keep in mind is the Warrens serve their purpose to the noble families of Tullus. The Pale Dogs serve the Vi, and the Vi serve the Balcazars. While we intend to clean up many things about the social structure of the city, there are also those of us who are members of the democratic movement. The idea that all of Tullus must be refashioned for the people to have a chance at the freedoms that some have and others are denied. Some of us believe the Warrens can never be free, while we are still locked in the society that we live within.
Well, I've certainly seen enough inequality, and I've seen how the other half, as they say, live. I agree something's not right. I'm not. I'll make no claim to being any sort of expert in politics myself, but certainly agree things need to be changed.
Well, it's a pleasure to welcome you to my home, Davros. It would be more so to welcome you to the Marauders and joining us in the struggles we have ahead. But for now, you can enjoy some of the pleasures that would have been granted to you by your sons' sacrifices. While you are here, while we can help anything you require, any assistance you would need in finding where Dem is, it is yours. You need only ask. And one day, if you decide that he made the right choice, we would invite you to join our ranks as well.
Well, much appreciated, Kellantas. Seems perhaps my son was not quite the screw up I admit I took him for, or not, at least not just that.
The two of them were still gamblers and were willing to stake a lot to gain far more. But I do believe in the last weeks of my experience, your son was furthering himself from some of those choices. And in particular, yeah, I think here he would say, like, and in particular, he was learning that perhaps it was time to separate himself from the dealings he had with the Killraven.
Again, I'm glad to hear it, and yes, I too heard that he had some dealings with them. I thought perhaps they might be responsible for him going missing. I don't know any details myself, really. Just heard the name, but if as you say, he was looking to make his break from them. Again, I'm glad to hear it.
I don't think there's any reason that Dem had necessarily shared anything about Killraven with Kalintas. I know you basically had a kind of like purely theoretical connection with Kalintas. Um, I think essentially the information that he would know is almost like from spying on you kind of situation.
Gotcha. Yeah, yeah, and and Dem obviously wouldn't have told Davros anything about it. So all Davros knows is that is what the captain told him earlier today. So
Gotcha. So I feel like this is a pretty solid kind of like theoretical end to at least this stage. Um, I think it gives us something to go on if we have Erwin and Mukhtar kind of find something in the future. We can basically decide whichever one, if one of them finds something, whichever one finds it can kind of be your sidekick in moving forward to like track that down. And would that be a potential option for next like session that you play out with Davros? Um, or as always, like if you have something in mind, whenever you think of it, you can let me know and I can try to develop that.
yeah, that sounds good.